Hey, what's new and exciting? It's Kevin O'Shaughnessy here, and in this video, I'm going to share with you a couple of my ideas for how you can kill writer's block and come up with awesome song ideas fast. If you're new to the channel, my name is Kevin O'Shaughnessy. I'm a hard rock recording artist, music producer, and teacher, so I discuss concepts of songwriting, music production, and performance, especially guitar. My goal is to help determined musicians such as yourself make better music more confidently by filling in some gaps of knowledge, usually between music and the tools we use to make it. So today I want to talk a little bit about songwriting, okay? Specifically generating ideas for songs. You're sitting there, you're staring at a blank piece of paper or a blank computer screen, whatever it is, and you're just like, what am I gonna write about? If you're a student of songwriting at all, you've probably looked up a few books, you've looked up some other YouTube videos or other things like that to try to figure out how to overcome this. Well, I've found over the years, I've studied a few different methods, and I've found over the years that it really comes down to just two very simple questions you can use. This is what I do all the time to generate songwriting ideas, and I'll show you how it works. Two very simple questions that you can ask to help you get more ideas fast. The first question is, what is new and exciting in my world? The second question is, what is new and exciting in the world around me? Okay, that's it. That's all it comes down to. Now let me explain how this works. New, for starters, does not have to be completely unique. As a matter of fact, it probably shouldn't be if you want people to actually find your song. New just has to be different for you, okay? And exciting doesn't necessarily have to mean fun. It just has to mean something that inspires an emotional response. Similarly, when I ask myself, what's going on in the world around me, I don't necessarily mean globally. I certainly can. What's going on, in South Africa or something like that. I don't know. You could certainly ask yourself that question. But a lot of times, narrowing the focus is a little better. What's going on in your circle of friends? What's going on in your immediate family? What's going on in your community, in your town? Could be world stuff, could be political stuff, could be whatever. Whatever it is that is, again, getting an emotional response from the people around you. As somebody that you know going through a hard time, that could be the seed of an idea right there. Here are a couple of caveats, and then I'll show you how this works. Caveat number one, you should probably know what kind of songwriter you are. And I'm not talking about style of music. I'm talking about what kinds of stories are you good at telling, and what is your best, I guess, literary convention to use in order to do that. Okay, so for example, if you like using a lot of metaphors and you're really good at that, then that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. So what kind of stories are you good at telling, and how do you like to tell them? Caveat number two, get used to the idea of writing a lot of crap. Okay, part of songwriting is practice, and some of the things that you're going to do really should just be for practice. Sit down and say, hey, I'm going to use this method. I'm going to come up with an idea for a song. And that idea might be horrible. It doesn't matter. Do it again the next day. And that's it. So those are the two caveats. Let me share with you a couple of examples. Example number one, asking myself, what is new and exciting with me? Well, a few months ago, my wife and I celebrated the birth of our second son. So obviously new to the extent that it is different, okay? But it's not new to the general population. People have kids. This is a common occurrence. So it's different for me and clearly exciting on every level, from, sheer joy to sheer terror. All of this stuff is right there. Now, caveat number one was knowing myself as a writer. So as a writer and even as a listener of music, I'd probably put that in there too. I'm not usually moved, even now that I have kids, I'm not usually moved by songs about kids. Sometimes they come off really well, but by and large, I'm not really moved by them. So I'm probably not going to write that song. But I can take that event that happened in my life and I can distill it into its emotional content, which can be varied. So in this case, one of the emotional contexts that I can talk about is essentially achievement, right? My wife and I talked about having a kid, having a second kid, and so this was something that we were very happy we achieved. People have achieved goals in their life, and hey, this is something that you can sing about. It doesn't necessarily have to be that exact story. For some people, these kinds of things are a surprise. You know, maybe they're not planning to have kids. Maybe they're not planning to have more kids, you know, expand their family or anything like that. So that sort of thing becomes a surprise. And what do? Well, people have been surprised by things like that. So you can take that element of surprise and superimpose it on another story if you know that you're not the one to write a song about kids. All right, so hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Example number 2, what's going on in the world? Now, I got to tell you, social media is awesome for this kind of thing because honestly, your world doesn't need to be any bigger than your Facebook friends list if you're looking for stuff to write about. Let's say, for example, I mean, at least in my friends list, politics is a big thing, pops up in the news feed all the time, okay? And a little while ago, you know, the one thing that really got people on both sides of the fence talking on my news feed was the president pulling out of the Paris Accords on climate change. Now, whether you support that action or not, there are a number of different emotional concepts that you can talk about in that. If you want to talk about the act itself, let's say you're in support of that idea, well, then you might consider that to be a very bold move. You might consider that to be a very country-centric move. You know, this is a we're taking care of us kind of move, okay? We're not going to be thrown by all of these crazy ideas about XYZ. That's something that you can superimpose into a news story. Again, knowing myself, going to caveat number 1, I'm not going to write that kind of song. I'm not going to write a political song. It's not that I haven't tried. It's just to me, they always sound cheesy. They just suck. So I'm not any good at it. So for me, writing a socially relevant song is not my strength. I've worked on it, but ultimately I know where my strength is, and my strength is in writing personally relevant songs. So I could take a song and say, okay, I want to write about just standing up to people who are trying to make, they're trying to get me to make a decision I don't want to make. They're trying to get me to make a choice I don't want to make. And if you're in support of the administration's withdrawal from the Paris Accords, that could be a way that you look at it. Now, if you're against that and you think that that was an absolutely bad decision, then that could be the same thing. You could kind of flip that around and write a song about somebody you know making some sort of critical error in their life, okay? Bring down the scope to something that's more about 1 or 2 people and say, okay, look, this person just made the most short-sighted and horrible decision in the world, but what would that story be, okay? That's the whole thing about kind of what's going on in your world and what's going on in the world around you. Usually, once I've gotten an idea, then I will go through a process of coming up with a title. Then I will probably... the steps kind of vary from here, but I will usually come up with a title, and I'll usually write a chorus, and then I will write the verses and the supporting material. Some people do it this way. A lot of people have their own methods after that point. Again, this video is just about generating ideas in the first place. After that, what you do with that idea and how you put it into a song, well, that's something we can discuss in more detail in other videos. And obviously, if you're watching this, maybe you have your own methods already. On my album, Persistence of Vision, there's a song on there called I'm Sorry. And when I set out to write it, I started by writing the guitar riff. I don't always do that, but in this case, I was really motivated to do it. And I like to challenge myself when I'm writing. So I sat down with this riff and I said, okay, what I want to do is I want to create a riff that I can use open strings on an acoustic guitar and have it sound very rich and sonorous. But then I want to be able to put it on an electric guitar and make it really heavy with muted strings and articulation. I came up with this really heavy riff, and I was proud of it. I really liked this riff. So as I usually do, shared the riff with my wife. She fell in love with it, and that's when I knew that I was onto something. My wife doesn't really have a loyalty to any one particular style of music, but she knows what she likes and she knows what she doesn't. So to that end, she's my perfect demographic. So I played this riff for her, and she's like, wow, that's really good. That's awesome. So I said, awesome, great. Okay, cool. That means this is probably something that I should finish. So I set it aside for a little bit of time, and then I came back, and I just, this idea kind of popped into my head for what might be the title of the song. And it was just this little hook, 2 words, I'm sorry. That was it. That's all I had. And I was like, okay, cool. And right off the top of my head, I came up with an idea. I'd been married once before. And so my thought kind of was, oh, you know, I'm sorry I wasn't everything you hoped for. Okay. So obviously my first wife and I, we got divorced. So it's like, I'm sorry it wasn't everything you hoped for. And I shared this with my wife, and she says, well, you know, okay, that's a cool idea and all, but I really like this riff, and I don't want this song to be about your ex-wife. Well, obviously that made me do an about face, because, well, that makes a lot of sense. So I went back to the drawing board, and I said, okay, well, now I got to go through some ideas. What's going on in my life? What's going on in the lives of people around me, so that I can come up with a new idea, with a new story that would be supported by a chorus that started out with, I'm sorry. And so, of course, I started with what I had. I'm sorry I wasn't good enough. Then I took the opposite of that. I'm sorry I'm too good, or I'm sorry I'm overbearing, or I'm sorry that this didn't work out. I'm sorry this did work out and it took me away. And just, this is where brainstorming and stuff really comes in handy, is when you've got a little nugget of something already. But I just kept churning this stuff out, and I had probably 20 or 30 ideas of all sorts of different things that you could be sorry for. One just started leading to another, and when I'd get to another item that I'd put down on my list, I'd try to figure out what the opposite of that might be, and that would generate a few more ideas. And ultimately, I came up with the idea of a slightly sarcastic application. This kind of, I'm sorry life is so bad for you, but suck it up and deal with it, because you've been hell to handle ever since this thing happened. Okay. So ultimately that's what the song became about. You know, hey, I'm sorry life's hard, but deal with it. It was kind of a tough love sort of thing. And I shared that with my wife. I said, what do you think about this idea? She's like, oh yeah, you've got to write that song. And so I did. So that kind of goes along with caveat number 2. Get used to the idea that you're going to write a lot of crap. I did. You know, apparently my first idea, it might have been a good idea, but under the circumstances, was not the best idea. And by accepting that first idea really wasn't going to work, it pushed me to come up with a better idea. Ultimately, I agree. I think the song is so much stronger with the new idea and the new storyline. And this is the kind of thing that I didn't have to spend a lot of time looking up techniques like mind mapping or whatever. I didn't have to spend a ton of time combing the internet or reading a ton of books to do it. I just asked myself 2 simple questions. What's new and exciting in my world, and what's new and exciting in the world around me? And that's how I start off going through the process for every song that I write. I had an English teacher in college who said, write about what you know. So that's where the idea sort of came from. It's like, well, I know what's going on in my world, and I can observe how my friends and family are reacting to things that are going on in the world. I can pay attention to how I'm reacting to that. I can distill it into its emotional component, because that's the kind of songwriter that I am. I write more personally relevant songs. So having the experience of writing has told me that. So I can distill the idea down to its emotional component, and then I can come up with a story that I want to tell. You might have different methods, and if you're new to songwriting, you can use this process to discover what kind of songwriter you want to be. Do you want to use a lot of metaphors? Do you want to make your lyrics very specific and tell direct stories? Or do you want to make them more vague and leave more of the interpretation up to the listener? Those are entirely your choices, okay? Nobody can tell you whether or not they're right or wrong. Do you want to create things that are so unique and so niche that you only want to appeal to a small audience? Or do you want to write things that are a little bit more universal and might appeal to a larger audience? Again, those are your choices, and they're all very cool. The point of this video right now is to just share with you that coming up with ideas for songs doesn't need to be any more difficult than just asking yourself, what's new and exciting? I hope you found that useful. If you did, go ahead and like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel if you want more great stuff like this. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comments. I'll be sure to answer them. This is Kevin O'Shaughnessy, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next video.